ring. Frank, we've got like a turnaround this morning because normally we're on Real Talk and talking perspectives. And today I want you to be involved in another scintillating edition of the lockdown sessions and talking reflections. How are you?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd love to share my experiences during that time with you. I'm well. Looking forward to your questions. Scintillating experience. Wonderful. I never heard that expression before.
I've set us up a little bit there, right? So, Frank, part of these lockdown sessions and what I've noticed is that I've had the time to really reflect. I'm not so busy all the time. And I've been wondering and in talking in these pods about what have we noticed and observed and learnt about ourselves during these days in lockdown. You know, we're almost 70 plus days here in the UK. When it comes to our learning about ourselves or about our environment, the world that we live in. So I pose the question to you, Frank. What have you learned about yourself and the world that you live in during these lockdown times?
Oh, Brett, where to start? I think for me, the biggest realization, I would say, my biggest realization was that it is really against my nature to accept loss of liberty. Mm-hmm. So with the restrictions, obviously, so maybe for somebody else listening, I moved to Romania. And so I was then exposed to how the Romanian state reacted to the lockdown. I must say, you know, overall sensibly, but as part of the restrictions which started to come into effect, I think around March 16th or something like that. And then they were gradually also getting harder, those restrictions. They actually declared a state of emergency. And with that state of emergency, they had, you know, more powers for making decisions that doesn't have to go through the parliament. So the government here just wanted to act very quickly, and they did. And in principle, they just didn't allow anyone to move outside of their house, unless it was part of a list of defined reasons as to why you could go. And you need to make a declaration and carry it with you if you were actually leaving your house for any of those reasons. If you didn't, there was loads of police and military, so they also called the military to help enforce the lockdown on the streets, and they was stopping almost everyone in the beginning. And so while I could understand that this is a sensible response for making sure that a virus spread is slowed down, I started to realize that it is how important it is for me to have the liberty to make the decision to leave the house. For whatever reason, not having to explain it to anyone, to take my motorbike and drive into the mountains and just have a good day, to go and see friends. So I'm sure that maybe some people, when they would reflect upon this, they would say, I have missed, you know, the actual closeness, the social connection with my friends or my family, and they have missed other things. I was missing the liberty of being able to do so. It's not just that I couldn't see my kids, for example, at a time who don't live here in the country. It is that I just wasn't allowed to, and it was made impossible to do that because everything was closed. So I do think that by now, I think I do have a higher appreciation for what it means to be free. Free movement.
Well, this is so interesting, right? Because I think I've noticed across generations as well, a real different response and reaction to lockdown, this loss of freedom. Because if we go back through time, I'm sure there have been moments when, you know, countries have been at war, where freedoms have been taken away, maybe even through peace times, where other countries are living in regimes where those freedoms are taken away. And of course, in some of us, the lockdown was terrible because of the environment in which they live, right? So not only losing their freedom, but being forced to stay within maybe a 30 square meter apartment with 3 other people, right? I mean, this loss of freedom and then enforced closure into one space,
Yeah.
mentally and physically and emotionally must be terribly challenging. So how do you take your understanding of this loss of freedom and how you didn't enjoy that, now that lockdown is being eased and we're moving out into whatever the next normal is, the new normal, I think is the phrase, how does this learning impact how you live? How do you take it with you?
Yeah, so I was already before that, a person who really takes a moment as often as I can to really live in the now and appreciate what I have right now, and have this awareness about that I'm living an amazing life, although, there may be difficulties here and there that I have to go through, but my life is wonderful, and I'm grateful for that. But it never occurred to me that, I don't know, this freedom of movement, this not living under an authoritarian state, in which this state has become during that time, it's going away now again. They're dissolving all this again, which should the way it should be. But in that time, so I didn't even know that. I mean, okay, intellectually I did know, but I didn't really feel the value of this freedom, because it's probably one of those things you have to lose something sometimes to really appreciate its value.
And then how do you feel that value now? What have you noticed? So when you were able to go out on your own whenever you wanted, do you find yourself going out all the time now? Or?
Oh yes, oh yes. Honestly, I think if anybody would observe me when I leave the house, I'm beaming all the time. I'm so happy about this. I can't tell you.
Yeah.
And but you know what? It's interesting also. People say there's a new normal. I think, I mean, at least here in this country, what I observe when you go out now that the terraces have opened again, so you can go into a beer garden and have a beer with, the distancing restrictions and so on. But actually, people are starting to rebel against even those restrictions more. So you find people that just say, no police around, let's do what we want. We want our liberty. We want to do what we want to do. Whether that's then smart from this virus perspective or not. But people here around here have this, seem to have, this deep wish of not being controlled by anyone. And I start to feel that too, because now I get a small taste. Let's be honest, it's a small taste. I wasn't lacking anything. I had the ability to, buy food, whatever I wanted. I could watch TV. I did interesting episodes with you on Real Talk. I was, there was nothing amiss other than the liberty.
Yes.
So it's just a small taste, as you say, that there are people who just live under regimes that control all aspects of their life, and only now I can even begin to imagine how terrible that must be.
I wonder if there's also a knock-on effect, Frank, that from your perspective, when you think of other people in your world, friends, family, elder generation, are you noticing that there's a difference in how people are responding to coming out of this lockdown? Because I've observed that some people very quickly have got used to living in their homes, not going out. It's almost as though they've been institutionalized within the last 3 months to just give up those freedoms, and actually they seem nervous to go out. No one's running to the pub in my village. It's still closed. The park is getting a little bit full, but it's only young people who are congregating together and breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Some people wear masks, some wear gloves, some don't wear either. It seems as though there's a real kind of sliding scale of extremes of how people are responding to this loss of freedom, the need to follow the rules. Do you observe the same way where you are?
It is. I mean, it's the same here. But I do think the effect is actually, it It's like on a time scale. There are people now that are just a little less afraid, and then they find the courage to just go out, and others are still very, very afraid of the virus. Everybody responded to this a little bit differently. I imagine if I would be a person who would be sitting in front of a TV and the news all the time, and have for 7 weeks or 8 weeks or 9 weeks would have just heard virus, virus, virus only, then probably I would also by now be very, very tense and maybe not even very rational about this. And but I do think over time this will just, how do you say, this will just, you know, go away in some shape or form. I don't think that people will be afraid forever. It depends on what happens next, you know. If it's really like slowly disappearing, then even people who are afraid now will begin to say, all right, maybe I can risk going out. So I think we're just seeing different levels of anxiety about the subject, and based on that, people are more courageous with going out and meeting than others.
How do you help, say, friends of yours who don't have the same kind of courage just to sort of go out and just be free in the world? How do you help them kind of take those steps? Because it can feel like baby steps to start with.
Yeah, look, I don't really advocate to my friends to be, you know, more courageous than they think is reasonable. You know, because I don't know if it's a smart thing to do or not. I want to just decide this for myself. You know, I want to decide my response to this. But I do have conversations with people about, I want to know what facts they know and how they rank them, you know. So for example, that's just, you know, my personal view. Some people really do think that, you know, a normal chirurgical mask is actually protecting you. I think by now it's been clarified for the most part. It's more about protecting someone else in case you're coughing or something like that. So what they do then is, I see people here on the streets also that are just walking outside on an empty road, but they're still wearing the mask. And so they must be afraid somehow that there's viruses in you know, everywhere in principle, and they're thinking that the mask will protect them from that. So I think they're overcautious. I have friends that are overcautious. I would say maybe you need to think a little bit about how likely that is, or what's the probability if you're, I don't know, alone in the park and there's nobody around you for 20 meters. You know, maybe I give them a little bit of my perspective. I share it, but the decision is up to them.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. They need to feel comfortable. If you need to wear the mask, even though you're the only man on the mountain, okay, that's your choice.
And I think this is, you know, part of my reflection actually that comes out of even listening to you, is I observed during the really intense period of lockdown how suspicious people were becoming of each other, even in my own village. You know, when we were out walking, you'd have people turning their backs, you know, or their arms over their faces to try and protect themselves, taking your point of that fear. And I suppose there's that nervousness that needs to come back out, where we're a collective, we are a human race that need to have connections. You even referenced it before. You were surprised that you didn't miss so much the connection piece, you missed the liberty piece. And I wonder whether it will really take time for us to heal that kind of suspicion, not just in a community, but, you know, country to country, when we start traveling again.
Oh yeah, you're right.
There's a lot of healing to be done.
Yes, that's happening actually. I observed the same. So if I'm walking on the street, let's say I'm going to go to the magazine where I'm going to buy my groceries while I'm walking outside, I'm not wearing the mask, I'm wearing it when I go inside. So some people that are coming towards me on the same boardwalk, sometimes they change the side of the street just because there's someone coming to them that is not wearing a mask. I don't know. I don't want to judge about that actually at all. I mean, maybe they're right, but the thing is, they are afraid, you know, of any kind of closeness. And I feel a little bit sorry for them because I think it's exaggerated, but they will come around over time. But it will take time. You're right.
I know that I was out running less than a couple of weeks ago in my local village. And just during the run, I got something just stuck in my throat. I needed to clear my throat.
Yeah.
I was walking towards a family, or I was running. They were walking towards me. And I lifted my arm up and I really coughed,
Yeah.
and just clear my throat from the run. It was a bit dry. And all of the family, the mother shielded her children, the father put his arm around them, and they're turning their backs to me, it was parting of a biblical parting of the Red Sea, as I ran past them, and they protected themselves from my terrible dry cough, as they thought. But this concept of fear, I think, is interesting. Maybe this is a topic we should discuss on another podcast.
Yeah.
How do we overcome fear? I'm interested in something you said earlier when you talked about your loss of freedom, how you realized it. And you mentioned, actually, it was when you realized that you couldn't just go out, get on your bike and drive into the mountains. Have you had a chance to get on your bike and drive into the mountains? And if you have, what did it feel like?
Yeah, I did. I did have that chance just a few days ago. And while I was, under my helmet and driving through the landscape, which was relatively empty, there's still a lot of people who don't, take any trips. Oh no, actually, there was at a time where I could do already a trip for business purposes, but the general population wouldn't be able to allow to leave their city without a reason. So I could do that. And it was relatively empty. I was smiling under my helmet. I was enjoying the air, but I was really mostly enjoying the fact that I could go wherever I wanted, really, at that time. And little later, I took a break somewhere in the mountains. There was a nice stream and a clearing where I would just, sit down under the shadow of a little tree and actually took a nap there. I was just so enjoying this. I don't know. I think on other days in the past, I would have liked that moment also. But after this little experience of lockdown and loss of liberty, I really enjoyed that freedom in that moment very, very deeply.
How do you maintain that appreciation and don't just move to taking it for granted or forgetting the learning? I'm always someone who looks at learning and thinks, okay, how do I make a commitment to myself that the learning means something more than just in the moment learning?
Yeah, I think I'm auto committed to that anyway, because I do take the time often to really have the mindfulness about the moment and the awareness about the things that are great in my life. The only thing that never occurred for me to be aware of also is this liberty, because I really grew up with this as a given. Not that I know it can be lost. I mean, I knew intellectually that it could be lost, but actually having had that experience, I know it will automatically appear in my, I don't know, awareness of the moment from now on. It will just be part of it, I'm sure.
And when you did lose it, when you suddenly realized you had lost it, what kind of emotions go through you? I mean, what is the feeling like when you realize that something is that important has been taken away from you? What were the emotions that you were experiencing?
Yeah, they weren't too intense, because this was one of those moments where this is going to have some end.
Yeah.
There's some end in sight. So the feeling there was mostly the impatience of that end to come and for it to happen. But I knew it was coming. If I wouldn't know, if I would be, I don't know, if I would be living in a state that is very restrictive and wouldn't allow you to do things for, always like that, and you don't know if this ever going to end, this is your life, I probably would have much harder emotions about this. But for now, I was just saying, all right, I don't know exactly when this end will come, but maybe in a month, maybe in 2, maybe in 3, but there's going to be an end. And I just have to muster up the patience which wasn't too hard because, of course, I do also understand why this needed to be done at that time.
And I think you're lucky in that respect, because a lot of people's struggles were with the uncertainty of not knowing when it would come to an end. So mentally, intellectually, they can understand it will, but the uncertainty of when, so how long am I going to be like this, was building up and building up and building up and creating a tension. It sounds to me as though you've been able to kind of reduce that tension by accepting what was happening, and maybe you have the intellectual capacity to be able to let go of that so that you can move through the process easier than perhaps other people have.
Yeah, that's true. But here's one thing that I do, and I think maybe that could be helpful to develop maybe for other people also, is an actual awareness about what is it that I can change and what I can't. And I don't want to spend any cycles of my life worrying about something that I cannot change right now. And then instead, try to focus on, okay, so what is it under the conditions that I can do to, have, moments of happiness, or, any sort of achievements or opportunities that I can see, that I can go after. Some people used it for learning new things. We started our series in this about real talk, and you know what, you just turn this away from the attention away from something that you cannot possibly influence right now, into seeing, okay, are there other things that you can occupy yourself with, that actually give something back to you instead of draining energy. And I think, but in principle, I think you have to have this awareness at all times when something actually is annoying you, or is making you afraid, or whatever it really is that makes you feel uncomfortable. Ask yourself, do you have any way of changing that right now? And often there are ways for you to actually change the position, but sometimes you can't. Like with this, I can't fight against the military on the street. Right.
Well, you could, but it wouldn't go very far.
I wouldn't go very far.
It'll do you much good.
Besides that, I probably even shouldn't. But this is just something. Why would I be so mad about this situation that I can't change right now? For me, it was enough to know this whole situation is somehow on the clock. It's not going to be like that forever. That was enough for me to know it's fine. So the solution will come on its own. I don't have to do anything for it.
But I think it's a really good point that you make, which is for anyone actually sitting, feeling stuck. And that's the word I would use, right? Feeling stuck.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the choice, the freedom, the liberty that you talk about. That if you can somehow get yourself to a point where you can recognize that actually you don't have a problem that you can do anything about. So don't worry.
Yeah.
If you can do something about it, then you can worry about what's the solution? What can I do? Let's take control. But if you actually can't do anything about it, you just have to learn to go with it. You've got to lean into it. You've got to experience it, feel it, and do whatever you can to experience it in the best way possible.
Yeah.
I imagine your bike rides into the mountains will forever have a slightly different, happy perspective when you reflect back to the spring of 2020, when you weren't able to go out on your bike or leave the front door without a receipt.
Oh yes, for sure. But actually, by the way you were saying that, it reminded me of this analogy where that we also had in one of our talks about you play the hand that you've been dealt in the moment. There's going to be a new hand in the next game. And for me, it was like, okay, I had a set of cards with which I can't, win the freedom right now, but I can still play a fantastic game in that time and do the best with what I have, So that was in my mind a little bit about how I thought about the whole situation.
If you were to give someone a top tip from your learnings in lockdown to move forward, not to survive another lockdown, although we might end up here again, who knows, what would your top tip be for others listening to this podcast who are thinking, how do I move forward and start the new normal?
So I think first of all, go out and, I mean, not necessarily literally, but go and enjoy what you have once the restrictions are over. Actually do take it in. I mean, go and enjoy it. It is not necessarily a given for the rest of your life. So go enjoy it. And as best as you can, as intensely as you can. Should something like this come back, I think it gives you peace of mind to let the situation solve itself. It will, over time, solve itself. You don't have to spend your energy in the form of anxieties and focus on this in a moment. Trust that it will resolve itself somehow. And then look at the cards that you have in that moment and just play a beautiful game as much as you can. It's going to be time. This is on a clock. These things are on a clock. They don't last forever.
I think you've given the title to this podcast session, which is "Play the Hand You've Been Given."
Right.
by FB.
Yeah.
Brilliant, Frank. I think that is a natural stopping moment. So thank you so much for your learnings, and I look forward to turning the tables when we're back on Real Talk next week.
We shall do that.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording.